working on a strappy front option, and for mine I'm going to do the Pullover U Back on this one. So I'm cutting 2 on the fold, and notice that the side seam is this part, and then this is the middle, the fold back. If you wanted a hook or ties here, then there is a U Back with pattern piece that's separate from this one. It's piece number 6. So number 5 is if you want it to just be connected there to pull it over. Okay, so I cut one of my main and one of my lining for that. For my strap, I cut one of these. You're gonna want a ring, either 1/2 inch or 3/4. And I'm gonna have 2 of my lining piece, and then I'm gonna have 2 of my main, and I marked where my darts are. You can also mark where you want your gathering, and then I cut out my bottom band. Now I'm ready to get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to prepare my front pieces by doing my darts. So I'm going to put it right sides together on your swim lining. Just pick whichever side you think is the softest. So that I think this side is the softest, so I'm going to put it right sides together, and I'm going to sew my dart. And I'm going to do that on this piece and on this one. Another thing I'm going to do to prepare my front is I'm going to hem this near the side seam on my lining, because I am going to need that to be an opening to put my cups in. Okay, so we have our front all constructed, so that means that we've sewn either our dart or our gathers. If you gathered, you need to gather it till it's 1 inch across. I did that on both, and then on my lining I also sewed the dart, and then I hemmed both sides. I didn't change my thread, it's just white. And so now we're ready to sew our side seams. So to sew your side seams, you're going to get your back first, whichever back you've chosen. So any back piece, you're going to put that up so the right side is facing you. And then the next thing you're going to do is get your main, whichever front you've chosen, and then you're going to lay that down and line it up on the side seams. And now you're going to get the lining of whichever front you've chosen, and then you are going to make it face up. So that means the wrong sides of your fronts are together. So line it up at the side seam. So I have my lining face the right side facing up. And then the last thing you're going to grab is whatever you've chosen for your back piece. And you want the lining of your back to face the right side down. So for me, that's going to be this way. So now you have all your side seams aligned, and you can sew your side seams. On this step, I'm gonna confess to you that I don't catch this in there. You're supposed to catch the bottom and top of it like this, but I find that really difficult with all of the layers. So I just kind of pin it to this so that I have it in the right place, in the right order whenever I go to turn everything out. But if you just, whenever you're going to baste on the next step, you can butt it up against the seam, and it's right where you need it, and everything is enclosed. So that's just my, I don't know if I should call it a pro tip or a lazy tip, but that is my tip. So I'm going to actually just be catching these 3 layers. And if you find this part difficult, you can always baste them before you sew them. So I'm going to use a 3/8 inch seam allowance and go ahead and do it on both sides. Okay, so I just sewed my side seams, and this is what everything looks like right now. And I am going to take it and flip this top piece, the back lining, to where it meets the back, and then you're going to flip your front out like this. And then here's this front lining. So it looks like this now. So now that we have it like this, it's time to baste all these pieces together. So lay it out flat. If your back is one that you're doing a hook or a tie, then it won't be connected here. And if your front is the full coverage front, then it's going to be connected here. So whichever way yours is laid out is correct for your option. And now you're going to take just start anywhere because you're going to go around the entire thing. You're just going to set your sewing machine to the longest stitch length and just go all along, putting all these layers to where their edges meet up and taking your time. I think it's easier to sew on the lining side, and then match up all your points. And once you're done with that, we'll be ready to sew our shoulder seams. Unless you're doing the halter version, you will not be sewing your shoulder seams right now. Now that we have basted, it should look like this. We have, and then whenever I got to the side seam, I just butted this up right next to where the side seam is. So the front lining, you have where you can put your cup in, but I didn't catch it in the seam allowance, and it works just as well, and it kind of reduces some of the bulk in the seam allowance too by doing it this way, and then you still have your nice opening. And I did that on both sides to where it's just basted, and then it'll get caught and whenever we do our elastic. So now you can, if you want to try on to check fit, you can right now. It's a little bit harder just because I think it's easier to do it if you can go ahead and sew your shoulder seams first, and then you can try on to check fit. And even then, without all the elastic, it's not going to show you everything, but you can kind of tell if it's going to end up where you want it to. So if you need to take a bigger seam allowance, you can. So I'm going to go ahead and put it to where the right side of my front is to the right side of my back and sew these. And as I said earlier, if you're doing a halter version, then you're not sewing your shoulder seams because your shoulder seam, you don't have a shoulder seam. You're going to have ties attached that tie in the back of your neck. Okay, but on any of the U back versions, this is where you sew your shoulder seams. And I'm just going to use my serger and use a 3/8 inch seam allowance to sew those. I'll be right. Okay, so we've sewn our shoulder seams, and now it looks like this. It's looking more like a top, and we're going to now sew elastic into our armholes. So you're going to look at the arm side, and you're looking at the Pullover U Back, and it's either pullover or hook. Any of the whatever option you have here doesn't matter to what the armhole is going to do. So it's going to cut to 3/8 inch elastic. The first one shows 15 1/4. So go ahead and grab your elastic, cut it to that length, and then you're going to sew it into a loop and apply it to the wrong side of this. So I'm going to grab mine, and then I will show you what it looks like to sew that in. So I've cut out my elastic for both of my armholes, and the way it has you do it in the instructions, it doesn't necessarily tell you to overlap them in a loop. I find it, I don't know, I like both ways. It's easier when you sew it in a loop because when you get to the end, you're not stretching this tiny little piece and then losing your grip on it. And then those issues. But then whenever you stitch it in a loop, you have that bulky seam right here where you've done that. So whichever one you prefer is actually fine, but if you're going to stitch them together, you're going to need to increase the amount that you cut based on what you've, if that makes sense. So like if mine calls for 15 1/4 and I want to overlap them, then I'm probably going to cut out 15 3/4 just so that I have that extra space to account for the seam allowance I'm losing when I overlap them. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I start, and even then sometimes I still cut mine a little bit extra, just so because I'd rather have the extra and trim off than to not have it. So I'm going to start in the armhole seam, and I'm actually going to make a mark where my middle is. Cut your elastic, or not cut it in half, but fold it in half. And then just make a mark where your halfway mark is so that you kind of have an idea of how much you need to stretch. And then go ahead and I start in the underarm, but you can start wherever you want. I think that's just my habit. And you're applying it all along the right side, and it's going to be so much easier since you did all that basting work because you're only focused on your elastic. You're not worried about keeping all your edges aligned because you've already done that. And then don't start stretching until you can see that your needle has caught the end of your elastic. And also pay attention your knife is not trimming your elastic or really trimming anything. And if that's hard, it's easy just to disengage your knife. You can also do this with your regular machine. Don't feel like if you don't have a serger, you can't do this. And I have to pull it from this side sometimes on thicker parts. So yeah, and your regular machine does just as well. Just use the zigzag. So that one turned out really nice. So this is what it looks like on the right side. So you see how it's kind of bunched, and that's good. And we're going to remove our basting stitches once we have our elastic in. And after you remove your basting stitches, you'll fold the that seam over, enclosing your elastic, and you'll top stitch it down. I'm gonna go ahead and sew my other one in before I remove my basting stitches. I'll do them at the same time. See, it's having a hard time getting past that, the shoulder seam, so I'm gonna pull it from this side and then pull this elastic right here. I don't think you're doing anything wrong if it struggles to get over a thicker seam. It's just when you're putting an elastic, you know, you're stretching it, so you're technically pulling it from this side, so it's having to work harder. The machine's working harder to keep it feeding through, so you're helping it. Okay, so now we have 2 done. I'm going to rip out these basting stitches. You don't have to rip your basting stitches. I just do in case they show any. And once I've done that, we're going to top stitch these arm sides down. Okay, so now that we have our elastic on that side, I've removed all my basting stitches. All we're doing is flipping it to the side, and I like to top stitch it down from this side, from the wrong side, and I use a zigzag between 2.5 and 3 in both length and width. And notice, and let's see, I'll start on the underarm seam so my back stitching can be hidden under my arm. So, okay, put your needle down. It's easier to start with your needle down. On my machine, at 2 is a zigzag. I'm going to put it at 2.8 and 3. Okay, so you have your needle down, and you are going to stretch it when you apply, so that, I'll put you closer so you can see what I'm saying. So that, let's see if I'm catching on camera. Do you see how it's even when I stretch it? You don't have any puckering. So you want to stretch it just like that the whole way that you sew it around. So you're not just leaving it even. So you want to make sure all the puckering is out and it's nice and flat. And you're just going to go over your seam allowance, enclosing the elastic and top stitching the edge down. And remember, if your machine is struggling with you pulling it while you're top stitching it down, then hold it from both sides like this. And it might struggle more over thicker parts than it does over thinner parts. So if you know you're coming up to a seam, then go ahead and do that. And also make sure your thread is the color you like. This one has so many different colors in it. I just went ahead and left mine white. So there you have it. It's going to look like this when it's laying flat, but on your body, it's going to look like that. So you're going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and do the other armhole. And then once I'm finished with that armhole, we'll need to do our entire neckline. So I finished my armholes on this, and now I'm going to do the neckline. So on your elastic cut chart, you're going to look at, this is the deep V full cup. If you were doing deep V, you'd look under this. And so this is the Pullover U. So deep V full cup, Pullover U, I'm going to cut 1, that is 35 1/4. So that is a 3/8 inch, and then I'm gonna quarter this one because that's a long ways to go. So go ahead and cut yours out, and then we are going to apply it to the wrong side exactly the way we did our armholes. And so I'll start here. I'll stretch it to meet my quarter points and here, and then I'm going to fold it under just the same way I did on the armholes. And so let's get started. So I finished applying all of my elastic to the neckline, and you'll notice, you can't see it now, but I started my elastic, well, you can see a little bit sticking out, 3/8 inch away from the bottom on both. And now I'm going to close this front part. So I'm going to set my machine to a wide zigzag. Well, so those stitch width, I'm going to put at 4.5. And then I'm going to start from this other side. It's just easier to start. And then I'm just going to sew these shut. And this will help when I'm applying my band. So you're just going to butt them up next to each other. I have seen people actually overlap their two front pieces, but that's nothing I've tried. You want to back stitch if you done finals, otherwise it might come out a little bit. There you go. And you can always undo any that you accidentally did above the center. And now that we have that done, we're going to apply our bottom band. Now we are ready to apply our bottom band. So for your bottom band, you're going to want to sew your short ends together, right sides together, and then you're going to mark your quarter points. So you're going to mark where it's halfway, and then you're going to put your halfway point to match your back seam and your quarter points, and then do the same thing on your bottom. So now that you have those points, you're going to put your band right side together, and then you're going to, I put the back seam in the back like this, and I'm going to sew the band to the bottom with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, and you won't have to stretch it that much. Leave a 1 inch opening so that you can put your elastic through. You'll have 1 inch elastic to put through. Okay, so I'm going to sew this with my serger, and then I'll be ready to put my elastic in. We're so close to being done. Okay, so one last thing we're going to do now that we have our band attached is we're going to fish some elastic. This is rubber elastic, but any swim rated elastic will do that is 1 inch in length. I found some on Wazoodle that I also really like. This is some I found locally. So once we have this fished all the way through, then we will, you can top stitch it down. But if you're doing the strappy version, do the strappy part before you top stitch it down. So, but you do, I would go ahead and fish this part through, or you could even do the straps. But you definitely want to wait to top stitch until you've done the strappy. And also notice, like my front, I have all this extra where I basted it, and I'll go and remove those. So I'm going to get this all the way through, and then we're going to do the strappy part together. Oh, and one thing I was going to show you is once you get both ends out, before we do the straps, we're going to put them together, like overlap them, and then just do a lot of zigzagging over it. But before you do that, make sure that your elastic did not get twisted anywhere in the band. I hate it when that happens. So make sure it's all nice and even, and then do that, and then close up your hole where you fished it through. Okay, so we're ready to work on the straps. So to do the straps, you're gonna find like a string. I know this is a strange thing, but you're gonna just tie a string to like attach to the end, and this will help you to turn it right side out. And you're going to sew, when you're sewing down, you're gonna attach, well, I'll show you from this side. As you're sewing, you're gonna have elastic on this side of the seam allowance. This is a 3/8 inch swim, just like you're using in the rest of the suit. But first, I'm gonna just, like with my regular machine, just tack this string down so that I can pull everything to the right side when I'm done. There you go. Okay, so that's on there. And so now I'm gonna use my serger, and I'm gonna apply elastic. Here, I'll turn my serger on, and I'm gonna apply elastic as I just sew down this strip. making sure that I don't catch my string. My string is kind of big. I didn't have a smaller string. Hopefully you do. And you're not trimming anything. You're just kind of keeping everything even on the edge, and then paying special attention that your string that you're going to use to turn it through is not getting caught in your seam, and that you're not trimming anything. And you don't need to stretch your elastic on this. More of the elastic. Okay, so this is what it looks like now. So you have a piece of string on the inside, and then you have that, and then you're going to pull your string. You could also use a tube turner if you don't want to do it that way, because I'm going to have to cut off where I attached it. There. Okay. So now that that is done, you're going to have one long strap, and then you'll have the seam on the back. So you can just top stitch it down and use a twin needle or your zigzag. Okay, there you have it. We're going to cut this into 3 even sections. Okay, so I have my ring. I needed a bigger ring than the one I had. And I am going to, okay, so my finished one ended up being 12 inches. So I cut these into 4 inches each because I wanted to divide them evenly by 3. So I am going to take each one, and I am going to loop it around, and I'm going to top stitch each one of these down once I have them down. So, you're just going to do a small zigzag across. Do a small zigzag across to hold each one down. Okay, so we're ready to put the straps on. I have, I'll show you what it looks like all zigzagged down. And so now it's really easy to find the center one because it's right in the center. But for these, I'm going to kind of eyeball where a good V is, where I think that the V looks appropriate. Like that, and then I'll make note of it on one side. So see, I think it looks good in that position. Or if you want it out a little bit more, you could do right here. So I'm going to make a mark there, and then I'm going to mirror it onto the other side. Because it's really kind of hard to, here you might think, oh, I did it great, I did a perfect job, and then try it on and realize it's kind of lopsided. So, so I made a mark where I'm going to put that one, and then I'm going to fold it in half. And I made that mark on the other side. So I'm going to go to my machine and see which one you think looks the best down. And I'm going to put this one down. And I think I'm just going to baste them down, and then I'll try it on and make sure I really like it before I do it for good. So that's the step I'm on, is just zigzagging these down into place. And then when you're done with that, you can top stitch down your band, which I think is so important. Otherwise, it's easy for that elastic to move around. And when you top stitch it, you're going to be folding the seam allowance onto it and top stitching that seam allowance onto the band. So you're doing 2 things at once. You're getting the band to be stable, and you're getting the seam to lay flat. Okay, so now your top is done. I just kind of top stitched over where I had top stitched here, and then I trimmed off any excess on the inside. And if now your top is done, and if this is going to be part of the one piece, then you probably should not have top stitched already right here. But if it's not, then you can go ahead and top stitch your band down. And there you go. Thank you for joining me.